I really enjoy working with salespeople, and I think they're very skilled and amazing people to work with. But there is data that shows their attention span is usually less than kind of, when you would compare to someone else in the population. So you're starting out with a reduced attention span in the sales organization, and then you pile social media on top of that. We've seen a decrement in attention, but there are ways to get around that, like using innovative formats, like things that are fun, like gamification.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Kristen Taraszewski. Kristen is the CEO of 11.2, they're a developer of training software using gaming to focus on training technical salespeople. So we started a conversation today talking about the challenges of training technical salespeople, technical sellers. But we start off by diving into Kristen's very unique career journey into sales training and her path from being a flight control engineer for NASA on the shuttle and U.S. Russian space programs to training seller. And what that experience working in that environment of NASA taught her about how to train technical people. Then we explore what Kristen believes are the three elements missing from sales training today, including a clear plan and the use of integrated learning methods. And we'll also then get into talk about the personalization of training, especially through the use of gamification. So we get into all this and much, much more. But before we get to Kristen, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you for your help with that. And let's jump into it with Kristen Taraszewski. Kristen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andy. Great to be here.
Yeah, we made this happen.
We did.
A little backstory will spare everybody, but we made it happen. We overcame technical challenges.
Indeed, we did.
As we should. So people who don't know anything about you, tell us a bit about you and what you do.
So I'm a biomedical engineer by degree, but my life and professional journey has taken quite a few twists and turns.
I was going to say, yes.
My first stop was at NASA as a flight control engineer. I worked in Mission Control Center and had the great...
Wait. Don't run right past that. So were you like in the astronaut program?
I was not in the astronaut program, but I wanted to be. So our group were the people who sit in Mission Control Center during shuttle and space station flights. And we react to sort of any sort of engineering issue that would take place that might have an impact on astronaut health. So I did astronaut training, applied to be an astronaut, but we ended up leaving NASA and I was not selected, but I would go in a heartbeat.
Oh, yeah. So when you were there, what were they flying? Still the shuttle?
So I started in the shuttle program and worked, I can't remember, years of flights, and then had the great opportunity to go to Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center and live at, it's called Star City. I went with 2 astronauts and 2 physicians, and we essentially created the groundwork for the space station program. So we built our U.S. operations base there, did some flight control in the Russian Flight Control Center, did, more astronaut training, kind of got the business, kind of my first startup, I say. I've been involved in startups since, but it was really kind of my first sort of startup experience. And then after Star City, I had the opportunity to work on the space station program.
So how long were you in Russia for that?
So I lived 1 year in Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center and then about 1.5 years in Moscow, about half mile from Red Square.
Wow.
I loved it. I got to say, I love the Russians. I love the culture. I love the program. It was really kind of the next frontier in terms of space. We'd been doing the shuttle. They'd been doing the Mir program. And then we came together. Definitely a lesson in international negotiations. We had, all the Europeans involved, the Germans, and it was just a really interesting time.
So what was it at that time? So what years were those? You were in Moscow?
So 95, 96, and part of 97.
Okay. So still fairly
dating
early.
Myself here.
Well, but still fairly early days after the fall of the Soviet Union. So, imagine a tremendous amount of transition that was happening at that time and then subsequent to that, clearly.
Yeah, and it was interesting from the perspective of all sides. We're really just trying to figure out what this future looked like. We had our operational programs, but what does it look like to collaborate and like build a space station, to control a space station, to decide on science that flies, to kind of thing. So it was definitely a period of massive transition.
And have you heard from colleagues about what it's like now in the aftermath of the Ukraine invasion in terms of that cooperation on the space station?
I was actually very fortunate. Very close friend of mine just got back from 6 months in space on SpaceX 3. And actually he gave me a call on my birthday and wished me happy birthday, from himself and for everybody who was on space station, which included a few Russians. So, there was no direct conversation about it, but the impression that I had is, in space, it was very collaborative and,
right.
Team kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've read some stuff that's sort of called into question the future of the space station and the collaboration, but interesting. So, all right. So at NASA, how do we get from NASA to sales?
Yeah. So, again, nothing really in my life have I said, I'm going to do this and then charted this path. I've been very fortunate and blessed to, have these different things come along. So, lived in Russia, got married, realized that getting married and living in two different time zones probably wasn't the best idea. So I came back to Houston. My husband and I worked for a few more years, and then I had some children. And when I had the kids, I realized I cannot do this 24/7 job and be a mom. So I just went into the nonprofit world. We moved to Minneapolis. And then after some years of running the nonprofit, I went back and had an opportunity to help a technical sales organization build a training program. And it was kind of a side project. They're like, hey, you want to build a training program for us? And I thought, let's try that NASA approach, because I saw what structured small segments of training can do, like at NASA. We had to know way more than we could have ever remembered. So we had to learn this foundational structure and then have access to all of the answers. So I thought, okay, let's give it a go. What can I lose here? And next thing you know, within a year, we had like 34,000 hours of training. People were using training as a means of selling more, performing more, really getting driven to this knowledge base. So I thought, okay, that worked. Let's try that again. So I went to another company, eight companies later. That approach really seemed to have a significant impact on highly technical sales organizations. So that's where I've been spending my time and energy for about the last 10 plus years. Fascinating.
So tell us about the structure, because if you're to ask most senior leaders in a corporation, and it's been asked, as the general opinion is, well, sales training, doesn't really work, right? It doesn't really stick. It doesn't really, one of N number of complaints about it. And it's not really about the content, I don't believe, as much as, we're still doing the group lecture approach primarily to training. So what were you doing differently that was helping the information stick?
So referencing that lecture. So lecture-based training, as you know, was developed in 1914, and it has about a 5% retention rate. One of my favorite diagrams in the world is the GEMS hierarchy of learning, or the learning triangle. And it talks about, you sit in a lecture, it's 5%. You add some audio visual, maybe they'll remember 10%. But once you start incorporating conversation and structured training and teaching others, you're driving the retention of a training session down to like 50, 90%. So this is where we want to live, in a 90% efficiency, because it costs a lot of money to pull these guys out of the field.
Sure, absolutely.
So, a couple things that we do. Number one, microsegmentation, or small little bits. Repeated exposure. People need to hear things more than once to.
So let's go through them one at a time, though. So you said small bits. So what's small? Because these days I hear people talk for anything from 3 minutes to 5 minutes to 9 minutes. I mean, what's what have you found has been most effective?
So that number has changed over the last 10 years. When we first started doing microsegmentation, people were having a heart attack. We wanted to break it up into 5-minute sections. Now with social media and depending on the age of the people that you're training, anywhere between 3 minutes is a sweet spot. That doesn't mean your whole course is 3 minutes. It just means that you can talk and teach for 3 minutes, and then you have to break it up with a check for understanding. So you teach them something, you ask them, you refresh those key points, and then you go on. So microsegmentation for video is 3 minutes. For lecture-based training is no more than 10, 12 minutes of talking.
Wow. Okay. And, it seems sort of easy to sort of blame it on the reduced attention span on social media and films and TV. But, is that really the case? I mean, do you see differences? You've seen differences?
Oh, absolutely. Well, for starters, and I got to say, I lead this with, I really enjoy working with salespeople, and I think they're very skilled and amazing people to work with. But there is data that shows their attention span is usually less than kind of, when you would compare to someone else in the population. So you're starting out with a reduced attention span in the sales organization, and then you pile social media on top of that. We've seen a decrement in attention, but there are ways to get around that. Okay. Like using innovative formats, like things that are fun, like gamification. So you keep people's interest by doing gamification. You keep their ability to retain knowledge through microsegmentation. And then the other thing is repeated exposure. So it's kind of a fancy way of just saying you got to hear things more than once to get it into your long-term memory.
Right.
So training should include repeated exposure, microsegmentation, and kind of innovative ways. The other thing that we just seems very basic, but it's surprising how rarely it actually exists, is you have to have a learning map. So you need to tell someone on day one, this is what you need to know to be successful, or this is the generalized area. It's kind of like taking a trip from California to New York. Like you'd never just start driving and hope you got there.
Right.
You'd map it. So the same is true for salespeople. You need a learning map so that they know kind of what they need to know, and they should get that learning map like day number one on a new job.
All right. So it raises an interesting question. So now, are you working primarily with sellers in a technical environment, or, and this distinctions might seem a little thin here, but I mean, like non-technical sellers in a technical environment, or technical sellers in a technical environment, or just like sales engineers, solution engineers, or all the above?
So yes, all of the above. So originally we started focusing only on technical sellers. And, some of those technical sellers are engineers, some are not, some come from different industries. But what we found is when you build this training structure, the deployment engineers can use it, inside salespeople can use it. Basically, everybody within the organization can utilize this structure and approach of the things that we've discussed. So it extends beyond just the sales. It's really the salespeople and their entire ecosystem.
Right. So second question, this is sort of a broader question, but because you're talking about, mapping out sort of this pathway, this series of expectations, it's not entirely clear to me that we really know what makes salespeople successful. And so it's, how do you map that out? I mean, I was just reading a really interesting book talking about the difference between vertical development and horizontal development of individuals, and horizontal development being more the conventional skills and product knowledge training and so on, which basically everybody gets. But, there's this idea within this book, which I think is right, is that where people are differentiating themselves is sort of called vertical development, which is, how are you developing more advanced critical thinking skills, conceptual thinking skills, and more, I think the author called it, more sophisticated cognitive and emotional, capabilities, which seem like are what really set sellers apart, right? Those who, at least in my experiences, is the most consistently successful, is that sort of that that thing, right? That's hard to identify, right? Because you can't really quantify it, but it sets them apart. So I've been thinking about this a lot in the last week since I read that book how are we really figuring out what people really need to learn?
So that is the conundrum that struck me 10 years ago when I built this first training program. I'm like, okay, let's see. We got tech, we've got sales process, we've got applications, and we were teaching those things in a linear way. Mm-hmm. But how do you teach these people how to think?
Right.
So the original idea was, okay, let's create a sales simulator like we had in Mission Control, where you get and you throw these different sort of problems at the guys. So they have to think the same way that they're thinking in the field. We couldn't figure out how to do that. So the next sort of iteration of that is gamification. So gamification requires these people to apply a little bit of tech, a little bit of sales process, and a little bit of application. And they may get that one and then they move and they're able to combine all kinds of thinking and apply it all at the same time. Doesn't guarantee this person is going to go to that next level or that they're going to grab onto it. But we feel like requiring people to think in different areas of their profession will help with that.
So give an example of how you do that.
Well, actually, we've been working on a software game for the last couple of years, which we just released into the marketplace, which is like true gaming interface, like pinball, Tetris, those different kinds of gamified structures that you used to. But it's testing the players in sales process, buying center, influence team, all that kind of stuff, tech. And how the tech is applied. And they have to combine all those things at one time.
Okay. So it sort of seems like simulation, though, to some degree, right?
It is. It simulates the thinking. But the interface is gaming. So it's not like they're walking up and they see a virtual reality human being, but they're working on those thought processes and they're working on building those neurological pathways of how they're thinking and applying all these different things all at one time to advance their sort of overall ability to use and develop those skills that they need to be successful in the field.
Interesting.
At least that's our idea anyway.
Well, I mean, I like the sound of it just because it's something different, right? And we spend untold billions every year on sales training. And quite honestly, the results haven't been very good over the last 10, 15, 20 years. Not the results of the training, but sales results being improved, let's say. And so it's interesting to hear about trying something different because it's what we need.
Well, the other thing is that's another thing that really just drove me nuts is like, how much does it actually really cost to pull a salesperson out of the field? So I sat down one day and literally added up plan, salary, tech support, shipping hardware, $3,400 a day. And this was 5 years ago to pull a salesperson out of the field for training. And when you sit them down in a classroom with lecture-based training and they're walking out with a 5% retention rate, I don't think organizations should accept that return on investment.
But it's the easy thing to do. That's what everybody knows. This is why they do it.
But it doesn't work.
Well, I know that.
And then people get frustrated. They leave their job. They feel like a failure. The company spends all this money. In last year alone, LinkedIn reported that 40% of salespeople left their job or are changing their job. So 40% of the sales force is changing industry, moving around. They've got to have a way to upskill themselves to learn very quickly and to become effective in these new jobs that they're in.
Right. But I think that comes from, I said, sort of these more human qualities as opposed, we talk about thought, being able to think differently than from just beating over the head with, hey, let's learn how to quote unquote sell again, which is what the vast majority of sales training is these days. It has always been, right? And it's like, it's not that some of the stuff isn't great and useful, but the way we present it is just missing that something that makes it all make sense for people. And I think this is, you see time and time again, I think it's become accentuated, certainly as we in the tech world with SaaS and so on is, hey, we're going to onboard everybody in 90 days, right? And they'll be fully productive in 3 months or 6 months, and completely unmindful of the fact that people learn at different rates. Things make sense at different rates, and yet they have sort of a one-size-fits-all training and onboarding program.
Yeah. And everybody's coming to the table with a different skill set or a different knowledge set or a little bit different experience, especially in like tech sales. You'll get people who've been lifers in a certain industry, and then these amazing salespeople who have no experience there. So you cannot give the person who just showed up and the person who's been around the same learning map and training program. I mean, you can, but it's wasting all of that time. Whereas if you can kind of customize it and identify specifically, like, this guy doesn't know this woman doesn't know that, and train them on those things, you can just accelerate the whole process.
But that personalization, that customization is what a lot of organizations resist. So what's the path forward with that? Because, quite admittedly, training is oftentimes sort of a checkbox things for many organizations. And there's certainly been advances in performance improvement we've seen from the world of sports, for instance, that have been very slow to adopt in the business world, or at least in the sales world. So how do you go forward with that?
Yeah. So again, that's where, that was something 10 years ago that I'm like, how do you customize these programs so people don't waste time and really focus on kind of what they knew? And that's where, again, we feel this gamification thing is like, you jump in, you take a challenge, you pass it, you move on, you fail it, you go back and learn. You pass challenge 1, 2, 3, your coworker passes challenge 4, 5, 6, and you're training at the same time at different levels and different topics. So you need to find, or we believe the way to do it is to identify knowledge gaps and train on those knowledge gaps based on, each individual may have different ones. So, you got your learning map. You've got to have a way to kind of progress through those things you already know and start at the thing that you don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, no, you're probably looking at my quizzical look on my face is yeah. I mean, it's, for me though, it gets back to the point. It's less about what you know, and it's more about who you are to some degree.
I think there's a huge element of that.
And so how do we, that's what I started driving at earlier, is that's, sort of this vertical development is more about who you are as opposed to what you are, what you know. I think this is the challenge for us in sales, is that I could be extreme and say, look, for most companies, you could just stop training your salespeople because it's not doing any good at all. And if we could find a way to put in front of people, hey, let's help people become better versions of themselves and whom they are, then it'll have a much huger impact on their ability to deal with buyers and help buyers really understand the things that are important and help them get the things they want.
Yeah, I totally agree. I agree. And I think this, these younger generations are coming in with the expectation of having a way to become their better selves. I was interviewing some 20-somethings the other day and asking them, gathering data, what's the most important thing about, where you will go work? Absolutely 100% resounding the ability to advance and to upskill and to learn new things. So to your point, how do we give people the best? I think we have to, or we're going to continue to see this massive movement of people moving from company to company. And there's a lot of kind of old thoughts about how to do it and what training and upskilling should be. And it's a one and done. I believe it needs to take place from hire to retire. I believe it has to be readily accessible. I believe you have to constantly ask your sales organization, what do you need? You've heard of Kirkpatrick. I mean, I think he's a genius in how he analyzes technical training programs or his methodology, asking them, what are you talking about to your peers? Which is identifying what's of value to them and what do you need to kind of go to that next level. So certainly a field of much opportunity right now.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's missing, well, among the things perhaps that's missing, but one in particular, and been talking a lot about this recently on this program and writing about it, is just we're missing a really important, constituency in a lot of these conversations, which are the buyers. I mean, I think selling largely is sort of, falls in this job to be done category, which is, I believe, buyers more so than ever these days basically hire, quote unquote, salespeople to help them make a decision. I mean, there's a lot of instances where, they've been able to go much further in their buying process without the assistance of salespeople than in the past. But there's when a buyer says, okay, I want to talk to a seller, or I need to talk to a seller, it's for a very specific reason, which is, hey, I need somebody to ask me questions that I don't know to ask myself. I need somebody to help me think differently about the challenges we think we're facing and the potential outcomes we can achieve. And we need someone from outside, again, a salesperson, to do that. So if they're fundamentally hiring a salesperson to help them get this job done, whoever asks the buyers what they need the sellers to be?
That is an excellent point. That's a genius. That's awesome. Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. So there should be some sort of data gathering opportunity from the buyers.
Yeah. These are people coming to help you get your job done. I mean, just as you would hire an internal person to do any job for you as a company, you need them to have certain skills and attributes and experiences and mindsets or whatever. Buyers, same thing.
Yeah, that would be actually an awesome screening tool. Like they show up, they're ready to hire a buyer. You somehow gather data from them of exactly what kind of questions they're looking to ask and then map it with the profile of your team. That'd be genius.
There you go.
We just figured out the next new thing.
We just figured out the next big thing. Well, I think it is. I think it is increasingly a thing. And because, there's, again, I'm talking the show a lot recently. There's data that a firm that I'm partnering with that has done thousands of interviews with buyers and win-loss analyses over the past dozen years and sort of summarized their findings into 9 reasons why you win big deals as a seller, 9 reasons why you lose big deals. And none of them have to do with the product. None of them have to do with pricing.
Yep. Yeah.
They have to do with the buyer's, not all, but almost all, the majority of it has to do with the buyer's experience with the individual seller. And it's not about product knowledge.
Right.
How are they helping me get my job done?
Yeah. That's genius. Yeah, it's need-based selling, right? Or like, what do you need? What do you need? Instead of focusing on feature all of the time.
But that's why it makes it so easy to train that, right? That's what I said, sort of this lack of imagination, which I'm curious and interested in what you were doing, is because it's like, we just line people up. Let's train them fundamentally in the same way we've been training them for 100 years. And not acknowledge the fact that, hey, that really hasn't been working all that well. Let's try something different.
Yeah. We, part of our initial research is we were super fortunate to have some like hundreds of years of experience, senior sales leadership in these huge global automation companies kind of involved in our organization from a sales coaching perspective, but from a development perspective as well. And much of what we do in the sales hallway of the training is talk about needs, identify the needs. And like, if they, start talking to feature, they fail. So it's got to be this sort of need focused. What do you need? What is, need focused approach versus feature thing, which is very, very common in technical sales.
Well, it stems, and I write about this in my latest book, Sell Without Selling Out, that we just fundamentally give sellers the wrong idea about what their job is. Because if you ask most sellers, and this is, again, anecdotal on my part, but I talk to groups all the time and ask this question, have been over the past umpty years, is, yes, salesperson what their job is. It basically boils down to, some variant of my job is to persuade somebody to buy my product. And I don't think their job at all. I think your job as a seller is to ask great questions of your buyer, listen to understand the things that are truly most important to them in terms of the challenges they face and the outcomes they want to achieve as a result of addressing the challenges, and then helping them get that.
Yeah, agree.
And
Totally
if you have
agree.
that mindset, and you train to that mindset, then these salesy behaviors that so many sellers default to start fading away a little bit. Because I'm not here to persuade you to buy my product, because when you go with that mindset, it's not really that important to you to really understand what's important to the buyer, because it doesn't matter. My job is to persuade you to buy my product.
Yep,
right?
Exactly. Uncovering their need.
Yeah, but if I'm here to really understand what's important to you, and then help you get that, then I think I take a different path. And I think it really plays into this idea of the sort of more human-centered attributes that are really important, and these emotional intelligence tools and more higher-level cognitive tools that help you then relate to the buyer.
Yeah, agree. Totally agree.
So we have to change that. I mean, but unfortunately, it's sort of the going-in position, and it sort of permeates society and our social, let's say, our worldview of sellers. That even people who have no experience in sales, cite an example on the show from a guest who was on the program earlier this year, Dawn Dieter Schmeltz, who runs the undergraduate sales program at Kansas State University, talks about in her Introduction to Professional Selling class, when she does role plays with these 18, 19-year-old kids who have no background in sales, she said they all default to being super salesy. As if that's what they think we're supposed to be. So some portion of our sales training has to be directly pointed at refuting that and making sure people have the right mindset of what this job really is.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think even experienced sellers have a tendency to do that.
Oh yeah.
To, pushing and selling, and we've been fortunate to just interface with hundreds and thousands of different type salespeople. And it seems like the ones, to your point, that raise to the top are the people who are having conversations and listening and, identifying needs for the customer versus coming in with the latest, greatest kind of best solution. I think the issue you point out is exaggerated by what's changing in the world right now with the different world we're living in. I mean, pre-COVID, there were face-to-face phone calls. People are, it's a different world, and there's a different mechanism of interaction. I think today, that personal aspect is lost. So I think we're facing a lot of changes in the sales world right now.
Well, yeah, but I think that many of those are overstated, the differences. And I'll give you a reason why is, there's this whole big thing about virtual selling, right? The pandemic, everything's virtual selling. And I'm like, well, yeah, okay. Well, virtual selling started when Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. We started selling virtually, right? We're talking to somebody that we weren't co-located with. Yep. And I can go back to my own career and the career of many others where I sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of product and services around the world, where 90% of the selling was taking place over the phone. And I still think that many sellers or organizations and thought leaders going into the pandemic, overstate how much of the actual selling was taking place face to face. I mean, I think we had a new medium.
Yeah.
It really wasn't even new, because the fact is, Zoom has been around for a while and people have been using Skype and other video conferencing things for a while, but the adoption certainly is at a higher level. But, we've been communicating virtually, and people know how to do that. They've been doing it in sales for forever.
True. From a training perspective, on the other hand, this new world has absolutely helped my cause, because people can no longer get together in a classroom. Yes. Lecture-based training goes away.
Yes.
When you have to break things into small segments because you're doing it online, amen, here we go. Here's some micro-segmentation. Exactly. So in many ways, this change has really helped open awareness and open minds about, let's change things up a little bit in terms of how we're doing it. We got to take this stuff to the people in the field. We need to take training material to people in their homes. So, we're also stressed at the beginning of COVID, but on the other side of it, in addition to the very positive social changes many people have seen in their life, it's really helped the training cause, from my perspective anyway.
I can see that. Yeah. I mean, it certainly stimulated innovation, I think, in terms of how we deliver training, how we think about training. Because, I mean, I've done some in-person, since the pandemic, in-person, lecture-based keynotes, let's say. But I think that innovative online learning is something that really the future. But especially if we can, like I said, make it a little bit broad and, like I said, focus about more on who people are as opposed to, what they know.
Yeah.
I think that becomes the crossroads. We need to figure that one out, because I think that is what's holding back sales, such as it is, and certainly, certain segments where you have really low win rates. It's like, well, what's the gap here?
Yeah.
And for me, part of my motivation, in large part, for writing this most recent book was that we just aren't getting any better. and why is that? I think it's because, in large part, we focus on these horizontal skill development instead of helping people think more about, okay, how do I bring the human me to help the buyer to this process?
Yeah, I agree with that. I got to give a little caveat on the lecture thing, just so I make sure I am by no means saying lecture-based training should never be used.
I agree.
I am just saying, and I just want to be really clear, because a lot of times we'll set up some lecture training. In fact, I've got a seminar I'm going to tonight on leadership training that we built. Lecture-based training, interactive training is great, but no one should ever show up at all without any pre-learning. So if you do lecture-based training, there should be some pre-learning involved. There should be some preconditioning involved. There should be some testing involved. And then if it is lecture-based, it should be some repeat back, teach back kind of thing to elevate that retention. I just wanted to clarify that, because I don't by any means want to say lecture-based training is a terrible way to train. It will never go away. People will always kind of call back to it, but you can bring a few things in that really elevate the impact and the effect, and what people walk away with.
Right. And then use tools like QStream, for instance. That's a company that does this micro-learning for reinforcement of training, that over a period of time that helps people integrate and apply what they learned. I mean, our
Throttle Up software. Our software is Throttle Up. We've got a course builder and a game. Software.
There we go.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are things out there that, if you're using them in conjunction with lecture-based training or digital training online or what have you. I mean, we're going to be rolling out, by the time this airs, I'll have rolled out already, is a QStream reinforcement for my book. It's one of the first business books to have that type of tool with it. So the readers will, over the several weeks following completion of reading the book, they'll get these series of emails to test sort of their knowledge and help them, integrate the learning things they learned and be able to apply them.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, because that reinforcement is really the critical part. So very cool. So tell us about Throttle Up then, and where people can learn more about that and learn more about you.
Yeah. So Throttle Up is essentially, so we were building these programs. It was, really having a dramatic impact on these organizations, but it was taking us too long to build them. So essentially we've built software to replace us, and it allows organizations on their own to build these structured programs using the course builder, which creates, training courses very quickly. Everybody within the organization can use it. There's no specialized knowledge required. It's kind of like turning all of the knowledge owners into knowledge providers for that rapid build. And then the game is where we allow users to apply what they've learned. Companies customize it much like Salesforce. We provide the structure. They input all of their data. They continuously update it as products and markets change. And then you have a way of hire to retire type skill development.
Cool.
Using a software tool. So if you want to learn more, our website is 11.2.com, and our name, 11.2. We believe that salespeople want to do better. and will do better if they're given the right tools. So they go from, performance level of here to an elevated performance level with the right tools. 11.2 meters per second is the escape velocity, or the velocity an object must travel to break free from the gravitational pull of the earth. So that's kind of our little thing. We feel salespeople can absolutely ascend to maximum heights if they're just given the right tools and the right training and the right opportunity to increase their skill and knowledge.
Got it. All right. Well, Kristen, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andy. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank our guest, Kristen Taraszewski, for sharing her insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you for your help with that. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.